Hello, sisters. This week you might notice a tug of war inside yourself. One part of you is tired and wants to be held, wants someone else to carry it all for a while. And another part of you keeps hearing, you're being asked to hold yourself now. If that tension is up for you this week, you're not imagining it, and nothing is wrong with you. There's a precise reason this may be activated in the sky, and it's not a punishment. It's building something in you. Today, we'll look at what is happening astrologically this week, what it is asking of us as women moving through the midlife passage, and one simple practice for meeting it. I'm Karen Ledesma, and this is the Venus Cycle Midlife's Roadmap, a weekly astrology transmission from the Chalice Path. I'm here to help you relate to astrology not as prediction, but as orientation, a living map for consciously participating in your life, especially through the initiation of midlife. Midlife is not a crisis, it's an initiation. It's the season where old identities dissolve, old patterns stop working, and if we accept the invitation, the body, psyche, and soul begin course correcting us towards greater self-trust, inner authority, and embodied feminine wisdom. In this work, Venus is our organizing field. Her 19-month cycle of descent and ascent gives us a roadmap for consciously tracking what we are being invited to release, reclaim, and embody as we become more fully ourselves. Each week, we'll look at the major planetary transits through that lens, asking, what are we being invited to attune to, align with, refine, and allow? Let's look at the astrology of this week, July 6th through July 12th. Since February, we have been in the ascent phase of this current Venus cycle. And this month, we're moving through the fifth gate, which is the throat gate. This is the gate of voice, truth, resonance, clear communication, and deep listening. Our theme around the fifth gate is that clear communication is birthed through deep listening. Listening deeply enough to know what is true. Listening deeply enough to know what is uniquely ours to say. Listening deeply enough to recognize when our words are aligned with the body, the heart, our values, and our inner knowing. As we decondition from old survival patterns, this is the work of allowing the feminine voice to become an expression of alignment rather than a strategy for approval, protection, over explanation, or managing how others perceive us. This week, we move through the refinement phase of the throat gate. This began July 3rd when the waning gibbous moon opposed Venus in the sky. The waning gibbous moon comes a few days after the full moon. So we are now in the second half of the lunar cycle. This is the return, the movement from fullness back towards emptiness, from expression back towards integration, from illumination back toward wisdom. And in our process, refine, ask, what needs to be adjusted through the lived feedback of our lives? Refinement is the practice of listening as we live into the invitation for growth. Once we begin to respond to life with more aligned choices, life responds back. Our bodies give feedback, our psyches give feedback, our relationships give us feedback, and our overall energy gives us feedback. And this is the point in the cycle when we begin consciously allowing our ways of communicating to be shaped by what we are learning. In the context of the throat gate, we might ask, what have I learned about listening? Where am I still speaking from projection, reaction, or urgency rather than from my clear, grounded truth? What happens in my body when I consider speaking a difficult truth? Does my throat tighten, open, freeze? Do I rush? Do I soften? Is the impulse to speak arising from a sense of wisdom, protection, care, reactivity, or a need to be understood? Would speaking this serve life? What needs to be clarified before it is communicated? Where am I over explaining, defending, performing, or trying to manage how I am received? And where is my voice becoming more aligned with what I actually feel, know, and value? And what new expression is ready to be embodied more fully? Refinement here at the throat gate is the devotional practice of listening closely enough to know what is actually true, and when it best serves life, to offer that truth. Sometimes this means listening to the pause before speech, listening for the difference between speaking from reaction and speaking from distilled wisdom, listening for the difference between speaking from old patterns and allowing our words to become more aligned with the woman we are becoming. This is where the voice matures. With this theme in mind, we can look at some of the major transits of the week. On July 6th, the Sun in Cancer squares Saturn in Aries. And Saturn is often spoken of through the lens of restriction, limitation, and the strict taskmaster. But through the lens of midlife, Saturn becomes much more meaningful as a wise teacher of capacity. Saturn is a middle world teacher. He brings us into reality, time, into the body, and into the actual conditions of our lives. Saturn asks us to look honestly at how we are showing up, what we are carrying, what we are avoiding, and whether the structures of our lives are actually supporting the woman we are becoming. When Saturn is active, either by personal transit or within the midlife timeline, we may feel a sense of heaviness, but heaviness itself can be information. It can show us where something needs our attention, where something has become too costly, and where something is no longer sustainable, where the price of staying the same may eventually become greater than the discomfort of making a change. Saturn asks, where are you being asked to mature? What structure can you build over time that will better support the woman you are becoming? What boundary is necessary to protect what is sacred? What are you strong enough to hold now that you could not hold before? And very simply, what is not working? And what is life asking you to take greater responsibility for? In the midlife map, Saturn is one of the great initiatory teachers. Saturn thresholds include the opening square around age 37, the Saturn opposition around age 44, the closing square around age 51, and eventually the second Saturn return around age 58. These are not random moments of pressure. They are developmental thresholds. They ask us to grow the inner architecture required to live with greater integrity, responsibility, and inner authority. So, when the sun in Cancer squares Saturn in Aries this week, we can tune ourselves into the archetypal tension between the part of us that longs for safety, belonging, softness, and care, with the part of us being asked to act and speak with courage, self-responsibility, and inner authority. Cancer Sun says, I need to feel held. Saturn in Aries says, you are building the capacity to hold yourself. Cancer Sun says, I need tenderness. Saturn in Aries says, yes, and tenderness also needs a boundary. Cancer Sun says, I want to belong. Saturn in Aries says, you can belong without abandoning yourself in the process. This is a powerful midlife teaching because so much of feminine conditioning has taught women to belong by adapting, to belong by caretaking, to belong by managing the emotional field, or to belong by softening the truth, making ourselves easier to love, easier to understand, easier to approve of. Saturn teaches us that real belonging cannot be built on self-abandonment. It requires structure, responsibility, and the capacity to stay with ourselves, even when that means we might be disappointing someone else. Then on July 7th, we reach the third quarter moon. The third quarter moon deepens the refine phase. The third quarter moon is always a moment of integration, an opportunity to metabolize and digest what has been revealed and bring the lesson down into the body. We are still listening, and still allowing this cycle to teach and to deepen us. On July 9th, Venus moves into Virgo. This is a major shift for the week, and it beautifully supports the refine process. Venus began the throat gate with the moon in Leo, inviting us to take up more space and to make choices aligned with our self-expression. As we start to wrap up this gate, Venus enters Virgo. And Virgo is the queen of refinement. Virgo understands that devotion lives in the details, that alignment is not only a feeling, but something we live, tend, practice, and return to through small, repeated acts of care. Venus is how we relate to ourselves, to others, to life, to beauty, to value, to desire, to worth, and to what we love. And in Virgo, Venus asks us to look honestly at the patterns that either support or interrupt our alignment. Because Venus quickly meets the South Node in Virgo on July 10th, this becomes even more important. In our work, we can think of the South Node as an escape route, a familiar pattern, skill, strategy, or identity that may have once helped us survive, but when overused, can pull us back into the shadow of the sign. With the collective South Node in Virgo, we are revisiting shadow Virgo patterns that have not yet been balanced by the medicine of Pisces. Perfectionism, over-analysis, over-functioning, criticism, trying to manage uncertainty through control, trying to earn safety through our usefulness, trying to become worthy by getting everything right, trying to refine ourselves into someone who cannot be rejected. This is where Virgo can turn against herself. And this is where the North Node in Pisces becomes the medicine, compassion, faith, surrender, trust, empathy, forgiveness, spiritual understanding, the capacity to partner with life as beloved, not as something to control or perfect, but as a larger mystery we are in intimate relationship with. As we near the end of this Pisces Virgo nodal chapter, Venus meeting the South Node in Virgo becomes a final integration point. Wherever Virgo and Pisces live in your chart, these themes have been active. And because this whole Venus cycle was initiated by Venus in Pisces with the North Node, these lessons have been woven into our relational field for quite some time. So this week asks us to harvest the wisdom we have gained, to reclaim the medicine of Virgo without falling into the wound of Virgo. Virgo, at her highest expression, is not here to shame us into improvement. She's here to teach us sacred devotion, life as ceremony, spirit brought into form through the sacred details of our lives and our bodies. On July 10th, we meet our next major touchstone in the cycle when the waning crescent moon in Gemini squares Venus in Virgo. This begins the final phase of the throat gate and this lunar phase, which is allow. Here, Venus is in Virgo. So the relational field is asking for integrity, clarity, refinement, devotion, and alignment in practice. The moon is in Gemini. So the emotional body is processing through language, thought, meaning, perception, conversation, and story. The square creates tension. Gemini can get lost in the maze of words. It can over-explain, it can deflect, it can keep moving mentally so that it does not have to fully feel. And Venus and Virgo can try to analyze everything into order. Together, this can become a loop of mental processing, trying to figure it out, trying to name it, trying to fix it, trying to make the sentence perfect, trying to arrive at certainty before the deeper truth has had time to emerge. But the mature expression of Gemini is the capacity to stay curious, to give the mind enough space to move, to let thoughts swirl without immediately believing every one of them, to allow language to become a bridge towards meaning rather than a way to escape feeling. And this brings us beautifully into allow. Allowing is the practice of giving the process time, space, compassion, and trust. Not every truth can or should be articulated the moment we sense it. Some truths need time before they become words. Some identities need time before they become stable. Some parts of us need to be held before they can speak. Allowing does not mean abandoning yourself or your truth. It means staying with yourself while something new is still forming. So as we move from refine into allow this week, we might ask, what needs time, trust, rest, or space? What am I trying to force? What is still unfolding? What needs more compassion? What part of me is ready to emerge? What new identity, rhythm, choice, or truth is still stabilizing? Where can I allow mystery, uncertainty, or the not yet without abandoning myself? This is especially important in this throat gate because sometimes the most aligned communication is not the immediate speech. Sometimes it is the pause before the speech, the breath before our response, the willingness to let the body catch up with the mind. the willingness to listen until the voice becomes clear. Then on July 11th, Venus in Virgo squares Sedna in Gemini. And this adds another layer to the Virgo Gemini signature. Sedna carries themes of betrayal, abandonment, exile, survival, and the stories we carry around father, family, protection, and trust. With Venus and Virgo square Sedna and Gemini, we may notice the mind trying to make sense of old stories, especially stories where we felt betrayed or not protected. Gemini wants to understand the story. Virgo wants to see the pattern. Venus wants to restore integrity in the relational field. But this is not about becoming trapped in the story. It is about seeing the pattern clearly enough to stop repeating it. Where is an old story shaped the way I speak? Where has past betrayal shaped the way I listen? Where has fear shaped the way I communicate? Where am I still trying to explain myself to someone who cannot hear me? Where am I still trying to perfect myself in order to be safe? And what would it mean to return to integrity instead? Not by having the perfect language or by solving the whole past, but by allowing the voice to come back into alignment with the self. Then on July 12th, we have two significant signatures. First, asteroid Inanna meets Saturn in Aries. Inanna is one of the great goddess figures connected to the Venus cycle. Her descent into the underworld is one of the oldest mythic templates we have for feminine initiation. The stripping away, the descent, the encounter with what has been exiled, the death of the old identity, and the return, the reclamation of power. So when Inanna meets Saturn in Aries, we are working with the maturation of feminine courage, feminine selfhood, and feminine initiation. Saturn brings structure, time, responsibility, and embodiment to the mythic field of Inanna. Saturn asks us not only to feel the initiation, but to become more capable through it. And this feels deeply connected to the larger work of reclaiming our feminine rites of passage. Because for so long, women have moved through our initiatory thresholds without enough structure, witnessing, or communal recognition. Sexual awakening, menarche, motherhood, loss, birth, perimenopause, menopause, the death of old identities, the return of feminine power, the reorientation of desire, the reclaiming of the feminine voice, the deepening of feminine authority. These are not inconveniences, they are thresholds, they are initiations. So, this Inanna Saturn conjunction reminds us that feminine initiation needs a container. It needs witnessing. It needs rhythm and structure. It needs women willing to recognize these passages as sacred, developmental, and real. This is part of what we are reclaiming in this work, not by going backward, but by remembering the pattern in a new way for a new world, a new time. Also on July 12th, the Sun meets Mercury retrograde in Cancer. This is the Mercury Cazimi, the heart of the Mercury retrograde cycle, a moment of interior clarity, revelation, and receding. Mercury is retrograde in the sign of Cancer, so the mind is turned inward toward memory, belonging, mothering, family, home. emotional security, ancestral patterning, and the great mother field. Cancer brings us back to the roots, to the mother line, to the body, to the question of what truly nourishes us, to the places where we learned belonging, and to the places where belonging required self-abandonment. So, this Kazemi may offer a moment of clarity around how we are being invited to mother ourselves differently, to revision belonging and care, to revision the mother line, to recognize what we are no longer here to carry as the feminine, and to understand that the work of mothering ourselves is not separate from the work of reclaiming feminine authority. Where the Inanna Saturn conjunction speaks to the structure and witnessing needed for feminine initiation, the Mercury Sun conjunction in Cancer brings the insight back home. What does it mean to belong to yourself now? What does it mean to mother the woman you are becoming? What does it mean to build a life where care, body, rhythm, nourishment, and emotional truth actually matter? This is the deeper Cancer invitation, not simply to return to the past, but to listen for the root pattern that is ready to be healed, revised, and reclaimed. So, this is a powerful week, a week of refinement, a week of listening, a week of maturing the voice, a week of noticing where old stories still shape the way we speak, listen, and relate. And a week where Saturn is asking us to build the capacity to hold what is becoming. The invitation this week is not to get it perfect. The invitation is to continue to listen. What voice is emerging from the woman you are becoming? What needs to be refined so that your words carry the weight of your alignment? And what needs to be allowed enough space, compassion, and trust to emerge in its own time? This is the practice of the week. Listen before you speak. Refine without turning against yourself. Notice the feedback your life is giving you, and allow what is still forming to have the time and space and trust that it needs. Thank you for being here for the Venus Cycle Midlife's Roadmap. Bring these questions into your body, your journal, your conversations, and the living practice of your week. May this support you as you move through your process. And may you trust the wisdom already moving through your body, your voice, and your becoming. If today made you wonder where you are in this larger midlife passage, I created a free map for exactly that. It's called What Chapter of the Midlife Passage Are You In? It walks you through the 5 chapters of the midlife passage, along with the guiding question of each one. You'll find it linked with this transmission. Download it, find your chapter, and let it support you in orienting to the passage you are actually in. Until then, listen deeply and trust what is becoming.